You stupid little nobody. You think you can save him? I killed better soldiers than you in their sleep. Dr. Nathan Mercer spat those words into Grace Sullivan's face, while his other hand shoved 3 milliliters of untraceable poison into Admiral Caldwell's IV line. Right there, Trauma Room 4, 6 nurses watching, 3 surgeons frozen. He poisoned a national hero and laughed while doing it. Then he grabbed the rookie nurse by her scrubs, dragged her toward the door, and threw her into the hallway like garbage. But Mercer made one mistake. Grace Sullivan wasn't just a rookie nurse. She was the last surviving combat medic of a classified SEAL unit that Mercer himself had sold out for $12 million in Afghanistan. And she recognized the poison, because she had watched it kill her teammates 3 years ago. Before we go any further, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment and tell me which city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Stay with me all the way to the end, because I promise you, this story will stay with you long after it's over. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. Fort Mercy Medical Center in Arlington, Virginia, had seen its share of emergencies, but no one on shift that night was ready for what came through those doors. The stretcher hit the corridor at full speed. 2 paramedics pushed it, both of them shouting at the same time, neither of them making complete sentences. A 3rd paramedic ran alongside, holding a pressure bandage against a chest wound that was already soaking through. 6 GSWs. Pulse is thready. BP 60 over nothing. We lost him twice on the way here. He's a flag officer. I repeat, this is a flag officer. Nurses scrambled. A resident dropped a clipboard. Someone knocked a supply cart sideways, and surgical trays clattered to the floor like broken bells. Nobody picked them up. Nobody cared. The man on the stretcher was Admiral James Iron Caldwell, 59 years old, 3 decades in naval special warfare, 2 silver stars, a Purple Heart. The kind of man whose name was whispered in Pentagon hallways and classified briefing rooms. The kind of man who had enemies he'd never even met. And right now, he was dying. They rushed him into Trauma Room 4. Dr. Nathan Mercer was already there, gloves on, mask up, eyes sharp. As chief trauma surgeon, Mercer ran the room. He always ran the room. Tall, composed, authoritative. The kind of surgeon other doctors deferred to without question. The kind of man who never raised his voice because he never had to. "Get me 4 units of O-neg," Mercer ordered. "I need a chest tray and a central line kit. Somebody page cardiothoracic, now." His voice was calm, too calm. The nurses moved. The residents moved. Everyone moved because Mercer told them to. That was how it always worked at Fort Mercy. Mercer spoke, and the world obeyed. But there was one person in that hospital who didn't obey. One person who stood in the back of the corridor and watched the chaos unfold with a stillness that didn't belong in an emergency room. Grace Sullivan, 26 years old, 7 months into the job, dismissed to medication rounds and vitals checks because nobody trusted her with anything that mattered. The other nurses called her Ghost. Not to be cruel exactly, but because she never spoke up, never pushed back, never drew attention to herself in any way. She moved through the hospital like she was trying to disappear, and most of the time, she succeeded. Tonight, Grace was supposed to be on the 4th floor, checking blood pressure readings for post-op patients. She had no business being anywhere near Trauma Room 4. But when she heard the sirens, when she heard the word Admiral, something pulled her downstairs, something she couldn't name, something old and deep and dangerous. She stood outside the trauma room door, looking through the narrow window. She watched the chaos inside. She watched the surgeons argue. She watched the monitors spike and crash and spike again. She watched Admiral Caldwell's face, pale as paper, still as stone, and she knew him, not from the news, not from some Navy pamphlet. She knew that face because the last time she'd seen it, it had been covered in blood and dust and firelight, and he had been screaming her name across a burning valley while dragging her through rubble with one arm. Grace pressed her forehead against the glass and closed her eyes. "No," she whispered. "Not him. Not tonight." Inside the trauma room, things were falling apart fast. Mercer barked orders, but nothing was working. The Admiral's blood pressure kept dropping. His heart rate was erratic, jumping between tachycardia and near flatline with no predictable rhythm. "He's bleeding internally," one surgeon said. "We need to open him up." "Not until we stabilize him," another argued. "If we cut now, he dies on the table." "He's dying anyway," a resident shouted. "Look at the numbers." Mercer stood over the Admiral, hands hovering above the chest wounds. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, his hands didn't move. His eyes flickered toward the IV stand, toward the bag of fluids he had personally hung 3 minutes ago. Then his hands moved again, and the moment was gone. No one noticed, except Grace. She had been watching Mercer's hands through the window. She didn't know why. Something about the way he paused, something about the way his eyes moved to the IV line, something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up, the way it used to in Afghanistan, when a patrol route didn't feel right. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. A nurse named Linda Hargrove spotted her immediately. "What are you doing in here, Sullivan? This is a level 1 trauma. Get back upstairs." Grace didn't answer. She moved closer to the stretcher, her eyes locked on the Admiral. "Sullivan," Linda hissed. "I said get out." Dr. Mercer glanced up. His eyes met Grace's for exactly 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, something passed between them. She didn't know what it was, but he looked away first. That had never happened before. Mercer never looked away first. "Get that nurse out of my room," Mercer said flatly. "She has no clearance to be here." A resident reached for Grace's arm. She sidestepped him without looking. Her eyes were on the monitor now. The Admiral's heart rhythm was wrong. Not wrong in the way a gunshot victim's heart should be wrong. Wrong in a different way. A specific way. A way she had seen before. The rhythm was being suppressed, chemically. Grace's breath caught in her throat. She looked at the IV bag again. The color was slightly off. The tubing clasp was a brand she didn't recognize from the hospital's supply chain. And there was a faint, almost imperceptible smell coming from the line. Sweet, metallic, like burnt copper. She knew that smell. Her hands started shaking. Not from fear, from memory. From a tent in Kunar province where she had smelled the same thing on a dying teammate's IV line and hadn't understood what it meant until it was too late. "His IV is wrong," Grace said. The room didn't stop. Nobody heard her. "His IV is wrong," she said again, louder. Mercer's head snapped toward her. "Excuse me?" "The IV line. It's contaminated. Pull it now." Mercer straightened to his full height. "Nurse Sullivan, you are not authorized to make clinical assessments in this room. Step back immediately." "Pull the line," Grace repeated. Her voice was steady now, flat. The voice of someone who had given orders in places far worse than this. "Security," Mercer called out without taking his eyes off her. "Remove this nurse from my trauma room. Now." 2 security officers stepped forward. Grace looked at them, then looked at the Admiral. His color was getting worse. His lips were turning blue. The monitor showed his oxygen saturation dropping. 89, 86, 83. Grace made her choice. She moved fast, faster than anyone expected. She ducked past the security officer on her left, slid between 2 residents, and reached the Admiral's side in 3 steps. Her right hand closed around the IV line and ripped it free from the port. Her left hand went to the Admiral's throat, 2 fingers pressing into the carotid artery at an angle that made every surgeon in the room flinch. "What the hell are you doing?" a surgeon screamed. "She's going to kill him," Linda shouted. "Somebody stop her." But Grace wasn't listening anymore. She was somewhere else, somewhere dusty and loud and full of smoke. Her fingers found the pressure point she needed. She tilted the Admiral's head back, adjusted his airway by 2 degrees, and applied rhythmic compression to a spot just below his jaw that no civilian medical textbook had ever described. It was a technique developed by a Navy combat medic named Torres during a mission in Ramadi in 2014. Torres had figured out that sustained vagal pressure at a specific angle could restart suppressed cardiac rhythm in patients exposed to certain chemical agents. He had taught it to exactly 4 people before he was killed in action. Grace was one of them. The monitor flatlined. "He's gone," someone whispered. Grace didn't stop. She pressed harder. She leaned close to the Admiral's ear and whispered words that no one else in the room could hear. "You told me to survive, sir, so you survived too. That's an order." 3 seconds passed. 4. 5. The longest 5 seconds of Grace Sullivan's life. Then the monitor beeped. 1 beat, then another, then another. Strong, steady, real. "What the?" a resident breathed. "His pressure's coming up," a nurse said, disbelief cracking her voice. 90 over 60, 95 over 65. It's climbing. Oxygen sat 91, 93, 96. "That's not possible," Mercer said. But his voice was different now, tighter, higher. The voice of a man watching something go very wrong for him. Grace stepped back from the stretcher. Her hands were covered in the Admiral's blood. Her scrubs were soaked. Her face was blank. But behind her eyes, a war was raging. Memories she had buried for 3 years were clawing their way back to the surface. The explosion, the screams, the sound of helicopter rotors that came too late, the faces of 11 men and women she had loved like family, burning in a valley that the world would never know about. She blinked hard and looked at Mercer. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. He knew. In that moment, standing over the Admiral she had just saved, Grace understood that Dr. Nathan Mercer knew exactly who she was, and he was afraid of her. The room was still buzzing. Nurses checked the stabilizing vitals. Residents scrambled to document what had happened. Someone called for a fresh IV setup, but the atmosphere had shifted. Everyone had seen it. The rookie nurse, the ghost, the nobody, had just done something that a dozen senior surgeons couldn't. Mercer recovered fast. He always did. He pulled his mask down and turned to the head nurse. "I want her removed from this room immediately. She physically assaulted a federal patient and performed unauthorized medical procedures without supervision." "I saved his life," Grace said quietly. "You violated protocol," Mercer shot back, "and you contaminated a sterile field." "The field was already contaminated," Grace said, looking directly at him. "That IV line wasn't from our supply. Check it." Something flickered across Mercer's face. Fast, gone. But Grace saw it. "I don't need a 7-month nurse telling me how to run my trauma room," Mercer said, his voice dropping to a register that made the residents step back instinctively. "Get her out. Now." This time the security officers didn't hesitate. One of them took Grace firmly by the arm. She didn't resist. She let them walk her out of the room, through the corridor, past the nurses who stared at her like she had sprouted wings or gone insane. Maybe both. As they passed the nurses' station, Linda Hargrove shook her head. "I always knew there was something off about her," she muttered to a colleague. "Quiet ones are always the most dangerous." Grace heard it. She said nothing. They took her to the hospital director's office on the 3rd floor. Dr. Patricia Winslow was already behind her desk, despite the hour. She had been called in the moment the Admiral arrived. Her face was severe. Her reading glasses sat low on her nose. A stack of papers was already arranged in front of her. "Sit down, Sullivan," Winslow said. Grace sat. "Do you understand what you did tonight?" "I stabilized a dying patient." "You physically intervened in a level 1 federal trauma without authorization. You removed a prescribed IV line. You performed an unrecognized medical procedure on a military flag officer. Do you have any idea what kind of liability that creates for this hospital? Grace looked at the termination papers on the desk. She could already see her name printed on them. He was going to die, she said. That was not your call to make, Winslow replied. Dr. Mercer is the chief of trauma. He had the situation under control. Grace almost laughed. Almost. No, she said, he didn't. Winslow leaned forward. Dr. Mercer has been with this hospital for 9 years. He has an impeccable record. He has saved more lives in this building than anyone I've ever worked with. And you, a nurse with 7 months of experience, decided you knew better? Grace stared at her own hands. The Admiral's blood was drying in the creases of her palms. She thought about telling Winslow the truth. All of it. About Afghanistan, about Wraith, about who she really was. But the words wouldn't come. They never did. The truth was a locked room inside her chest, and she had thrown away the key years ago. I'm placing you on immediate termination, Winslow said, sliding the papers across the desk. Your badge, please. Grace unclipped her ID badge and placed it on the desk. Her hand lingered on it for a moment. 7 months. 7 months of pretending to be normal. 7 months of counting pills and checking vitals and smiling at patients and lying to herself that the past was the past. Security will escort you out, Winslow added. You are not to return to this facility. Grace stood up. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She had learned a long time ago that the people who control the paperwork always win. At least in buildings like this. She walked out of the office, down the elevator, through the lobby, and out the front doors of Fort Mercy Medical Center. The night air hit her face like cold water. February in Virginia. Her breath turned to fog. Her scrubs offered nothing against the chill. She wrapped her arms around herself and started walking toward the parking lot. She was 11 steps from the door when the ground began to vibrate. It started low, a rumble she felt in her feet before she heard it. Engines, heavy, powerful engines, coming fast. She stopped walking. She turned toward the hospital entrance. Headlights blazed through the darkness. 1 pair, then 2, then 4, then 10. 10 black SUVs swept into the hospital driveway in a formation so tight and precise that Grace's body recognized it before her brain did. Military convoy, tactical spacing, coordinated stop. All 10 vehicles braked at the exact same moment. Doors opened simultaneously. Men and women in dark suits stepped out with a kind of synchronized movement that only comes from years of operational training. They weren't police. They weren't hospital security. They moved like operators. Behind Grace, nurses and doctors crowded against the hospital windows. Someone gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh God, did the Admiral die?" But Grace knew. She felt it in her bones with a certainty that turned her blood to ice. They weren't here for a dead man. They were here for a ghost. A man stepped forward from the lead vehicle. Tall, sharp jawline, gray at the temples. His badge was clipped to his belt, but it bore no agency name, no seal, no insignia, just a number. He stopped 3 feet in front of Grace. "Grace Sullivan," he said, not a question. Grace didn't respond. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought they might crack. The man studied her face the way a scientist studies a specimen. "You're a hard woman to find," he said. "Took us 3 years." "I think you have the wrong person," Grace said. Her voice came out steady, but her hands were trembling at her sides. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. He held it up so she could see it. A woman in full SEAL combat gear. Night vision goggles pushed up on her helmet. M4 rifle across her chest. Standing in front of a mud-walled compound in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. Smiling. Grace stared at her own face from 3 years ago. A face she barely recognized. A face that still believed in things like loyalty and justice, and the idea that the people standing beside you wouldn't sell you to the enemy. Petty Officer First Class Grace Sullivan the man said. Combat Medic, SEAL Team 7. Classified Unit Designation Wraith. Last surviving member. Grace's legs almost gave out. 3 years. 3 years of hiding, of silence, of pretending that woman in the photograph had died in that valley with everyone else. And now, standing in a parking lot in Virginia, in blood-stained scrubs, the past had finally caught up. My name is Agent Cole Brannigan, the man said, Defense Intelligence Agency, and I need you to come with me right now. No, Grace said. Brannigan didn't blink. The Admiral is alive because of you, but the person who tried to kill him tonight is still inside that building, and he knows you're alive now. Grace felt the air leave her lungs. What are you talking about? Brannigan stepped closer. His voice dropped to a register only she could hear. The shooting tonight wasn't random. It was coordinated from inside this hospital. Encrypted communications, altered medications. Someone in that ER wanted Admiral Caldwell dead, and they almost succeeded. Grace shook her head. That's not... Who would... The same person who sold your unit's position in the Korengal Valley, Brannigan said. The same person who killed 11 American operators for $12 million. The same person who has been hiding in plain sight for 3 years, just like you. Grace couldn't breathe. Her vision narrowed. The parking lot lights blurred. She thought she might collapse, but her body locked rigid the way it always did under threat. Combat posture, a reflex she couldn't unlearn. Who? She whispered. Brannigan held her gaze. Get in the vehicle, and I'll tell you everything. Grace looked back at the hospital. Through the glass doors, she could see the lobby, nurses pointing, the director staring. And further in, moving through the corridor with his white coat and his composed expression and his steady, deliberate hands, Dr. Nathan Mercer, talking on his phone, not looking at the commotion outside, not looking at the fleet of government SUVs that had just descended on his hospital, not looking because he already knew they were coming. Grace turned back to Brannigan. Tell me now, who is the traitor? Brannigan's jaw tightened. Grace, not here. Tell me now or I walk. A pause, 2 seconds that felt like 2 years. Then Brannigan exhaled through his nose and said the words that shattered everything Grace Sullivan had built to protect herself. Dr. Nathan Mercer, your chief trauma surgeon. He was at your forward operating base in Afghanistan 2 days before the ambush. He was the inside man, and tonight he altered the Admiral's medication to finish what he started 3 years ago. Grace didn't scream, she didn't cry, she didn't collapse. She went completely still. The kind of still that comes right before an explosion. The kind of still that the men of Wraith would have recognized as the most dangerous thing about her. Mercer, the man who had just fired her. The man who had stood 3 feet from Admiral Caldwell with a syringe of clear liquid and the power to decide who lived and who died. The man who had smiled at Grace in the break room last Tuesday and asked how she was adjusting to civilian life. The man who had killed her family. Grace walked to the SUV, opened the door herself, and got in. Brannigan followed. The door shut with a heavy thud. The convoy began to move. And inside the hospital, standing at a window on the 2nd floor, Dr. Nathan Mercer watched the black vehicles disappear into the night. He lowered his phone from his ear. His hand was steady. His expression was empty. Then he pulled a second phone from his coat pocket, a phone that wasn't registered to any name or network, and typed 4 words. She's alive. Move now. The SUV pulled away from Fort Mercy Medical Center at exactly 12:19 a.m. Grace sat in the middle seat, flanked by 2 agents who smelled like gunmetal and coffee. Neither of them looked at her. Neither of them spoke. The only sound was the low hum of encrypted radio chatter from the front seat and the steady rhythm of Grace's own heartbeat pounding against her eardrums. Brannigan sat across from her, a reinforced tablet open on his knee. He watched her the way a man watches a grenade with a loose pin. Carefully, respectfully, but ready. Grace broke the silence first. How long have you known about Mercer? 14 months, Brannigan said. We intercepted a fragment of encrypted communication from inside Fort Mercy. Took us 6 months to trace it back to him. Took us another 8 to build enough of a case to act. 8 months. Grace's voice was low and dangerous. You watched him for 8 months while he operated on patients, while he walked the halls, while he stood 3 feet from me every single day. Brannigan didn't flinch. We didn't know you were there, Grace. Your cover was that good. We thought you were dead. Everyone thought you were dead. I wanted to be dead. The words came out before she could stop them. She regretted them immediately, not because they weren't true, but because they were too true. And she had just handed a piece of herself to a stranger in a government vehicle. Brannigan closed the tablet. I'm going to tell you everything, but I need to know that you're ready to hear it. I've been ready for 3 years. 12:24 a.m. The convoy turned off the main highway onto a service road that led into an industrial district south of Arlington. Grace counted the turns out of habit. Left, right, left. 4 minutes of straight road, then a gate that opened before they reached it. Brannigan started talking. Your unit, Wraith, was deployed to the Korengal Valley on a classified mission to intercept a weapons shipment. The intelligence was sourced from a single asset, vetted by Naval Intelligence and approved by JSOC. Everything about the mission looked clean. It was clean, Grace said. Commander Reyes ran it by the book. Every checkpoint, every fallback, every contingency. He didn't cut corners. No, he didn't, which is exactly why the ambush shouldn't have been possible. Wraith's route was classified at the highest level. Only 7 people outside the unit knew the patrol coordinates. One of them was Admiral Caldwell. One of them was a military surgeon who had been consulting at your forward operating base for 2 weeks under the cover of studying battlefield triage techniques. Grace closed her eyes. Mercer, he arrived at your FOB 14 days before the ambush. During that time, he had unrestricted access to the medical tent, which shared a wall with the communications room. He didn't need to hack anything. He just needed to listen. Grace's fists tightened in her lap. She remembered Mercer at the FOB. She remembered him being friendly, charming even. He'd brought chocolate bars from the PX and handed them out to the medics. He'd asked Grace about her techniques, told her she was one of the most talented combat medics he'd ever seen. She had smiled. She had thanked him. She had trusted him. He mapped our movements, Grace whispered. Our shift rotations, our patrol timing, our rally points. He knew exactly where we'd be and exactly when we'd be there. Yes, Brannigan paused, but it gets worse. Grace opened her eyes. How does it get worse than 11 dead Americans? Because the ambush wasn't just about your unit. It was about what your unit found. 12:31 a.m. The convoy stopped inside a converted warehouse. Grace heard the heavy gates close behind them. The agents in the front seat stepped out first, scanning the perimeter before opening her door. But Grace didn't move yet. What did we find? Brannigan held her gaze. 2 nights before the ambush, Wraith intercepted a shipment that wasn't on any manifest. 40 crates marked as medical supplies. Commander Reyes opened one. Inside were components for advanced guidance systems, American-made, heading to a buyer that the United States government officially considered a hostile entity. Grace felt something cold crawl up her spine. We never saw any crates. You did. You just didn't know what they were. The intercept happened on a secondary objective that Commander Reyes ran off book because the primary target was a dry hole. He photographed the crates, logged the serial numbers, and transmitted the data back to JSOC through Admiral Caldwell's direct channel. And someone saw that transmission. Someone saw it, and within 48 hours, every member of Wraith was dead, except the Admiral, who was commanding remotely and survived the initial blast. And except you. Grace stepped out of the SUV. Her legs felt hollow. She walked into the warehouse on muscle memory alone, one foot in front of the other, because if she stopped to think about what she was hearing, she would break apart and never reassemble. 12:38 a.m. The warehouse interior had been transformed into a mobile command center. Grace barely registered it. She registered the faces. 15, maybe 20 agents and analysts, all of them turning toward her as she entered. Some nodded. Some stood straighter. One woman near a bank of monitors pressed her hand briefly over her heart. They knew who she was. All of them. They knew what Wraith was. They knew what happened in the Korengal Valley, and they had been waiting for her. Brannigan led her to a long table in the center of the room. On it were files, tablets, surveillance photographs, and a clear evidence bag containing the bullets that had been pulled from Admiral Caldwell's body earlier that night. "The shooting tonight," Brannigan said, picking up the evidence bag. The gunman was a former private military contractor named Dean Solis. He's in federal custody. He fired 6 rounds into the Admiral's vehicle at a traffic intersection 4 blocks from the Pentagon. Who hired him? Solis was paid through a shell company registered in Delaware. That company traces back to a network of former defense contractors who lost a $4.7 billion weapons deal when the evidence Wraith collected threatened to surface. For 3 years, they've kept it buried. Admiral Caldwell was the last person who could connect the evidence to the contractors. He was scheduled to testify in a sealed congressional hearing tomorrow morning. Grace stared at the bullets in the bag. So they tried to kill him before he could talk. They tried. And when the shooting didn't finish the job, they activated their inside man at Fort Mercy to make sure the Admiral never left that hospital alive. Mercer. He altered the Admiral's IV within minutes of arrival, a slow-acting compound designed to suppress cardiac function gradually. By the time anyone noticed, it would look like the Admiral's body simply gave out from the gunshot trauma. Natural death, no questions. Grace's stomach twisted. "I pulled that IV line. I smelled the compound." Brannigan nodded slowly. "How did you recognize it?" Grace didn't answer for a long time. The warehouse hummed with quiet activity around them. Keyboards clicked. Radio frequencies crackled. Someone poured coffee somewhere behind her. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. But Grace was not in a safe place inside her head. "Torres," she finally said. "Staff Sergeant Victor Torres. He was our lead medic. He'd been studying chemical cardiac suppressants because we kept losing people in the field to symptoms that didn't match their wounds. He figured out that certain compounds could be introduced through standard IV lines and would be virtually undetectable in a trauma setting." She swallowed hard. "He taught me what to look for. The smell, the color shift in the fluid, the specific way the heart rhythm changes when the compound takes effect. He said, 'Sullivan, if you ever smell burnt copper on an IV line, rip it out first and ask questions later.'" "Where is Torres now?" "Dead." Grace's voice cracked on the word. "He died in the ambush. He was standing 6 feet from me when the first IED detonated. I watched him burn." 12:47 a.m. Brannigan gave her 3 minutes. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell her it wasn't her fault. He just stood nearby and let her breathe. Grace appreciated that more than he would ever know. When she was ready, she walked to the evidence table and began going through the files herself. Her hands were steady now. The grief was still there, massive and heavy, but something harder had formed around it. Purpose, direction, the things she had been missing for 3 years. "Walk me through the timeline," she said. An analyst named Yates pulled up a digital display. 2100 hours tonight. Admiral Caldwell left a secure briefing at the Pentagon. His motorcade took the standard route. At 2112, a black sedan pulled alongside at the intersection of Columbia Pike and South Joyce. Dean Solis opened fire from the passenger window. 6 rounds. The Admiral's security detail returned fire and neutralized the vehicle, but Caldwell was already hit. "Why Fort Mercy?" Grace asked. "There are 3 hospitals closer to the Pentagon. Why bring him here? The room went quiet. Brannigan and Yates exchanged a look. Because someone redirected the ambulance, Grace said, answering her own question. Yates nodded. The original dispatch was to Walter Reed. The redirect order came from a hospital liaison who received a call from a block number at 2115. 3 minutes after the shooting, before the ambulance even loaded him. Grace felt the pattern clicking together like the chambers of a lock. Mercer had it planned. The shooting was step 1. Getting the Admiral to Fort Mercy was step 2. The contaminated IV was step 3. And firing me when I interfered was step 4. And step 5, Brannigan added quietly, was disappearing before anyone connected the dots, which is what he's doing right now. Grace turned sharply. He's still in the hospital. He was 20 minutes ago. We have agents covering every exit, but Mercer knows that building better than anyone, and he has a 12-minute head start. He won't use the exits. Grace's mind was racing now, processing tactical information the way it used to in the field. Fast, clean, ruthless. Fort Mercy has a service tunnel that connects the basement to a maintenance building 2 blocks east. It was built in the 70s for emergency evacuation. Most of the current staff don't even know it exists. Brannigan grabbed his radio. Bravo team, cover the maintenance structure at 15th and Edison. Service tunnel access from Fort Mercy basement. Move now, a voice crackled back. Copy, en route. Grace kept talking. But that's not where he's going. That's where he wants you to look. Mercer is smart. He'll use the tunnel to access the maintenance building, then double back through the parking garage on the north side. There's a staff vehicle lot with no camera coverage. He's had a car there, I guarantee it. How do you know that? Because I've had an emergency bag in my trunk for 3 years, parked in the same lot. When you're hiding, you always have an exit. Mercer's been hiding too. 1:03 a.m., the radio erupted. Bravo, lead to base. Tunnel is clear. No sign of the target. Maintenance building is empty. He's not here. Brannigan looked at Grace. She was already moving toward the door. North lot, she said, now. But before she reached the exit, another transmission cut through the noise. This one from the team still stationed at Fort Mercy. Base, this is Alpha 4. We have a situation at the hospital. The Admiral is crashing. His vitals just dropped off a cliff. Medical staff are calling a code. Grace stopped walking. Every cell in her body froze. Repeat that, Brannigan ordered. The Admiral is coding. They're running a full resuscitation. It's bad, sir. Grace spun toward Brannigan. Mercer didn't leave. He went back. That's impossible. We have every floor covered. You have every floor covered for a man in a white coat. Mercer's not wearing a white coat anymore. He changed. He blended in. He walked right past your agents because he looks like every other staffer in that building when he wants to. Grace's voice rose. He's in that hospital right now, and he's killing the Admiral. 1:06 a.m. Brannigan didn't hesitate. All teams converge on Fort Mercy. Priority 1 is Trauma Room 4. Lock down the entire floor. No one enters or exits without verification. Grace was already in the SUV. An agent jumped in beside her. The engine roared before the door was fully closed. How fast can we get there? Grace demanded. 7 minutes. Make it 4. The driver hit the gas. The convoy tore out of the warehouse like a pack of wolves, engines screaming through the empty streets. Grace sat forward, elbows on her knees, hands clasped together so tight her knuckles turned white. Her mind played out the scenarios. Mercer was methodical. He wouldn't rush. He would walk into the trauma room with a syringe or a modified IV bag, looking calm, looking like he belonged, because he did belong. He had operated in that hospital for 9 years. Every nurse, every resident, every security guard knew his face and trusted his authority. He could walk up to the Admiral's bed, inject the same toxin he had used before, and walk out. 30 seconds, that's all he needed. By the time anyone noticed, Caldwell would be in cardiac arrest, and Mercer would be gone. "Can you reach the agents inside the room?" Grace asked. Brannigan tried his radio. Static. "Comms are jammed on the hospital floor." "He's jamming communications. He planned for this." "He can't jam military encrypted channels." "He can if he has the right equipment, and he does. He's been preparing for this for 3 years, just like I have. The difference is I was preparing to hide. He was preparing to kill." 1:09 a.m. The convoy was 2 minutes out when Brannigan's phone rang. Not his radio, his personal phone. A number he didn't recognize. He answered it on speaker. "Agent Brannigan." The voice was calm, controlled, almost pleasant. "This is Dr. Mercer." Grace's blood turned to ice. "I know you have my hospital surrounded," Mercer continued. "I know you have Grace Sullivan in one of those vehicles. And I know you think you're going to stop me. But I want you to consider something." A pause. Grace could hear the faint beep of a heart monitor in the background. "I'm standing next to the Admiral right now. Your agents on this floor are currently dealing with a fire alarm I triggered on the East Wing. They'll figure it out in about 90 seconds. That gives me more than enough time." Brannigan's voice was granite. "If you touch him, you will not leave that building alive." "I don't need to leave, Agent. I just need to finish. The Admiral's testimony dies with him. The evidence stays buried. The people I work for stay free, and the 12 soldiers who died in Afghanistan stay forgotten, just like they were supposed to." Grace grabbed the phone from Brannigan's hand. "Nathan." Silence on the line. Then a soft laugh. "Grace, I have to admit, when I saw you rip that IV line, part of me was actually impressed. You were always the talented one. Torres was the teacher, but you were the natural. Step away from him. Or what, you'll save him again? You're 4 minutes away. I only need 30 seconds. Grace's throat constricted. Her eyes burned, but her voice held. "You killed them. Silva, Garrett, Holt, Commander Reyes, Torres. You killed all of them, and you've been walking around for 3 years like it never happened. It's not personal, Grace. It was never personal. Your commander found something he wasn't supposed to find. That made him a liability, and liabilities get eliminated. That's how the world works. And the Admiral? The Admiral is the last loose end. After tonight, there's no one left who can connect the evidence to the people who paid for it. No witnesses, no testimony, no wraith." Grace pressed the phone against her ear so hard it hurt. "There's me." Another pause, longer this time. When Mercer spoke again, his voice had changed. The pleasantness was gone. What remained was cold and flat and empty. "Yes," he said, "there's you, but I'm going to take care of that too." The line went dead. 1:12 a.m. The convoy hit the hospital entrance at full speed. Grace was out of the SUV before it stopped moving. She hit the ground running, agents flanking her on both sides. They blew through the front doors. Staff screamed and scattered. A security guard reached for his radio, and an agent flashed credentials without slowing down. Grace ran for the stairs. The elevator would be too slow, and Mercer might have disabled it. She took the steps 3 at a time, lungs burning, legs driving. First floor, second floor, third. She could hear agents behind her, boots pounding on concrete, weapons drawn. She hit the trauma floor and turned the corner hard. The hallway was chaos. Nurses running in every direction. A fire alarm blaring on the East Wing. Smoke drifting from a supply closet where Mercer had triggered the diversion. 2 agents stood outside Trauma Room 4, weapons up, confusion written on their faces. "Did anyone enter this room?" Grace shouted. "Just medical staff," one agent said. "A nurse and an anesthesiologist." "What anesthesiologist?" The agent hesitated. "I didn't catch the name. He had credentials." Grace shoved through the door. Inside, 2 nurses stood frozen by the monitors. A resident held a crash cart, hands shaking. And there, standing at the head of the Admiral's bed, adjusting an oxygen line with gloved hands, was a man in surgical scrubs and a mask. The man looked up. His eyes met Grace's. She knew those eyes. "Step away from him," Grace said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of 3 years of rage and grief and burning, suffocating fury. Mercer didn't move. His right hand stayed near the Admiral's neck, fingers resting lightly on the oxygen tubing. "You're too late, Grace," he said through the mask. "I already gave him the second dose." Grace looked at the monitor. The Admiral's heart rate was dropping. 62, 58, 53, 47, 47, 44, 41. Grace didn't look at the monitor again. She looked at Mercer's hands. His right hand rested near the oxygen tubing. His left hand was at his side, but his fingers were curled slightly, hiding something. A syringe. She could see the edge of it, just barely, catching the light between his knuckles. "Everyone out," Grace said. The 2 nurses didn't move. The resident gripped the crash cart tighter. "Now," Grace said, and something in her voice, something that didn't belong to a rookie nurse, something that belonged to a woman who had given orders in places where hesitation meant death, made all 3 of them move toward the door without a single word of protest. Mercer watched them go. "Clearing the room? That's tactical thinking, Grace, not very nurse-like. Take your hand off his oxygen line." "Or what?" Grace stepped closer. 1 step, 2. She kept her eyes locked on his. "You know what I'm capable of. You saw my file. You watched me work for 7 months. You know." Mercer tilted his head. "I know you're a combat medic who's been hiding behind a fake resume and a quiet voice. I know you can start a heart, but can you stop one?" His left hand moved. Fast. He brought the syringe up toward the Admiral's neck, and Grace covered the distance between them in a single, explosive motion that came from somewhere deeper than training. It came from Torres burning alive 6 feet from her. It came from Commander Reyes shouting her name through smoke and fire. It came from 3 years of nightmares and silence, and pretending she was someone she wasn't. 1:14 a.m. Her hand closed around Mercer's wrist. She twisted hard, rotating his arm inward against the joint. The syringe clattered to the floor. Mercer grunted in pain, but he was stronger than she expected. He drove his elbow into her ribs and shoved her backward. Grace hit the edge of a supply cabinet. Pain shot through her lower back. Mercer lunged for the syringe on the floor. Grace kicked it. It skidded under the Admiral's bed, spinning out of reach. Mercer straightened up slowly. "You can't save him this time. The compound is already in his bloodstream. In 4 minutes, his heart will stop. No amount of field medicine will bring him back." "You're wrong." "Am I?" "Torres taught you the emergency protocol. I know he did. But the protocol only works within 2 minutes of exposure. You're already past that window." Grace's chest tightened. He was right. Torres had been specific about the timing. The vagal pressure technique she had used earlier worked because she had caught it fast. This time Mercer had been in the room for God knew how long before she arrived. "How long ago did you dose him?" she demanded. Mercer smiled behind his mask. "Wouldn't you like to know?" Grace's mind raced. The Admiral's heart rate was at 39 now. She had minutes, maybe less. She couldn't use the standard protocol. She needed something else. Something Torres had only mentioned once, late at night in the FOB, when they were both exhausted and he was thinking out loud. "There's a theoretical counter method," Torres had said, scribbling on a napkin. "If you reverse the vagal pressure, sustained high-frequency stimulation on the left carotid combined with bilateral thoracic compression, you might reset the cardiac rhythm even after the window closes. But I've never tested it. It could work. It could also stop the heart permanently." Grace stared at the Admiral. His lips were turning blue. His breathing was shallow and irregular. The monitor showed 35 beats per minute and falling. She had no choice. "Grace," Mercer's voice was almost gentle now. "Let him go. It's over. He's one man. His testimony won't bring your squad back. Nothing will." This isn't about bringing them back, Grace said. She moved to the Admiral's left side and placed both hands on his chest. This is about making sure they didn't die for nothing. She began the counter method. Left hand on the carotid, applying rhythmic pressure in a pattern Torres had sketched on a crumpled napkin 3 years ago. Right hand performing bilateral compressions at a speed that would have looked wrong to any trained physician in the room, because it was wrong by every textbook standard. But Torres didn't think in textbooks. Torres thought in possibilities. Mercer watched her with something that might have been fascination. That won't work. The compound binds to cardiac tissue within minutes. You're compressing dead muscle. Grace ignored him. She counted in her head. 1, 2, 3, press. 1, 2, 3, press. The rhythm Torres had described. The rhythm she had never used. The rhythm that existed only in theory and in the handwriting of a dead man on a napkin she had memorized before burning it. 30 beats per minute. 28. 26. He's dying, Grace, right in front of you, just like they all did. Shut up. Torres died in front of you. Garrett died in front of you. Reyes died screaming your name, and you couldn't save any of them. Shut up. You ran, you hid, you pretended to be nothing, and now you think you can be something again? You think pressing your hands on a dying man's chest makes you a hero. Grace's vision blurred. Tears ran down her face, but her hands didn't stop. 1, 2, 3, press. 1, 2, 3, press. She leaned close to the Admiral's ear and spoke through clenched teeth. You don't get to die on me, Caldwell. You carried me half a mile through a kill zone with one arm. You didn't stop. You didn't give up. So you don't get to give up now. Come back. Come back right now. 24 beats per minute. 22. 1:18 a.m. Brannigan burst through the door with 4 agents. Weapons drawn. They saw Mercer standing by the wall and immediately trained their guns on him. On the ground! Now! Mercer didn't resist. He raised his hands slowly, almost casually, and lowered himself to his knees. An agent cuffed him with practiced efficiency. Mercer's mask was pulled down. His face was calm, almost serene, the face of a man who believed he had already won. You're too late, Mercer said to Brannigan. The Admiral will be dead in 60 seconds, and without his testimony, your case collapses. The contractors walk. The evidence stays buried. Wraith stays forgotten. Brannigan looked at Grace. She was still working on the Admiral's chest, tears streaming, hands moving in that strange, desperate rhythm. Grace, talk to me. I need 60 more seconds, she gasped. Torres's counter method. It takes 90 seconds of sustained stimulation to reset the rhythm. His heart rate is at 20, an agent said, reading the monitor. 18. Grace, Brannigan's voice cracked. 60 more seconds, she screamed. Her arms shook. Her muscles burned. Sweat and tears dripped onto the Admiral's hospital gown. She pressed harder, faster. The rhythm was everything. Torres had been exact about the rhythm. 2 beats per second on the carotid, 3 compressions per cycle on the thorax. Sustained, unbroken, 60 more seconds. 15 beats per minute, 13. Mercer laughed softly from the floor. Listen to that monitor, Grace. That's the sound of failure. That's the sound of everything you went through meaning nothing. 1:19 a.m. Grace closed her eyes. She couldn't look at the monitor anymore. She couldn't hear Mercer's voice anymore. She went somewhere inside herself, somewhere dark and quiet and full of dust. She was back in the FOB. Torres was sitting across from her, scribbling on that napkin, talking with his mouth full of terrible mess hall coffee. The thing about the heart, Torres had said, is that it wants to beat. Every cell in that muscle is designed to fire. Sometimes it just forgets how. You just have to remind it. That's all medicine is, Sullivan. Reminding the body what it already knows how to do. Grace pressed harder. Her count was precise. Her hands were steady, even though every other part of her was falling apart. 10 beats per minute. Time of death, Mercer said from the floor. 1:19 a.m. 8, 6. Grace felt the Admiral's chest shudder under her hands. A tremor, small, almost nothing, but she felt it. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on, remember how to beat." 4, 3, flatline. The monitor screamed, one long, unbroken tone that filled the room like a funeral bell. Grace's hands froze on the Admiral's chest. Behind her, Brannigan looked away. An agent lowered his head. The nurses outside the door began to cry. Mercer exhaled, long and slow, like a man settling into a comfortable chair. "It's over." Grace didn't remove her hands. She couldn't. She stared at the Admiral's face, gray now, still, the face of a man who had once screamed at her to survive while carrying her through fire and smoke and death. The face of the last person on Earth who knew what happened to Wraith. The face she had been carrying in her memory every night for 3 years, because his was the voice that said, "Stay alive, Sullivan. Someone has to remember them." She pressed her forehead against his chest. "Please," she breathed. "I can't do this alone. I can't carry them by myself anymore. Please." 1:20 a.m. 47 seconds of flatline. Brannigan reached for Grace's shoulder. "Grace, he's gone." She didn't move. Her hands were still on his chest, still pressing, still counting. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Because Torres said 90 seconds. And she hadn't hit 90 seconds yet. She had 11 seconds left. "Grace, you have to stop." 10 seconds. She pressed. 9, 8. Her arms were dead weight. Her fingers had gone numb. 7, 6. She couldn't feel anything anymore except the cold skin under her palms and the hollow emptiness of a room that had given up. 5, 4, 3. She heard Torres's voice, clear as a bell in her memory. "The heart wants to beat, Sullivan. You just have to remind it." 2, 1. Grace pressed one final time, every ounce of strength she had left, every ounce of grief, every ounce of love for 11 people who died in a valley on the other side of the world. She pressed it all into the Admiral's chest. Silence. Then, from somewhere deep inside the dead man's body, a beat. Not on the monitor, not yet. She felt it, under her hands. A single contraction. Weak. Uncertain. Like a fist trying to unclench after being closed for too long. Then another. Then another. The monitor caught up. Beep. A pause. Beep. Another pause, shorter this time. Beep, beep, beep. "Oh my God," an agent whispered. "His heart rate is climbing," a nurse said from the doorway, her voice shaking so badly she could barely form words. 12, 15, 20, 25. Grace collapsed forward. Her arms gave out completely. She slumped against the Admiral's bed, sobbing, gasping, shaking from head to toe. Her fingers were still curled against his chest, feeling each beat, counting each one like a prayer answered. Mercer, still on his knees with his hands cuffed behind him, stared at the monitor. For the first time since Grace had known him, his composure cracked. His jaw tightened, his eyes widened. He looked at Grace the way a man looks at something he cannot explain and cannot control. "That's not possible," he said. The compound had full saturation. His cardiac tissue was compromised. There is no medical protocol that can reverse that. Grace lifted her head. Her face was a wreck, tear-streaked, exhausted, broken in ways that didn't show, in ways that did. She looked at Mercer with eyes that burned like the valley she'd crawled out of 3 years ago. "Torres found a way," she said, "and you killed him for it. But he taught me first." 1:24 a.m. Brannigan ordered Mercer hauled to his feet and removed from the room. As the agents dragged him toward the door, Mercer twisted in their grip and locked eyes with Grace one last time. "This doesn't end with me," he said. His voice was low and hard and stripped of everything human. "The people I work for don't lose. They don't forgive. And they don't forget." "Neither do I," Grace said. They took him out. The door closed. And for the first time in 3 years, Grace Sullivan was alone in a room with Admiral James Caldwell, the man who saved her life, the man whose life she had just saved. Twice in one night. His eyes fluttered. Not open, not yet, but moving behind the lids, dreaming or fighting or somewhere in between. Grace pulled a chair to his bedside and sat down. She took his hand. It was cold. She wrapped both of hers around it and held on tight. "Take your time," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." 1:31 a.m. Brannigan stood in the hallway outside the trauma room, phone pressed to his ear, voice clipped and urgent. "I need a full toxicology workup on the Admiral's blood. Whatever Mercer used, I want it identified, cataloged, and cross-referenced with the compound recovered from the Korengal Valley site." He listened. His jaw tightened. "I don't care what time it is. Get the lab open. This is a national security matter." He hung up and turned to Yates, who was scrolling through data on a tablet. "We've got a problem," Yates said. "We've got several. A new one. Mercer's phone, the burner he used to call you. We pulled the records. He made 4 calls tonight. 1 to you, 1 to a blocked number we're still tracing. 1 to the hospital's internal switchboard at 2115, which matches the call that redirected the Admiral's ambulance. And the 4th? Yates turned the tablet toward Brannigan. "Placed at 2108, 7 minutes after the shooting, to the personal cell phone of Director Patricia Winslow." Brannigan didn't react visibly, but his left hand curled into a fist at his side. Winslow, the hospital director, the one who fired Grace. She fired Grace within 20 minutes of the Admiral's arrival, on Mercer's recommendation. She didn't consult legal. She didn't consult the board. She didn't even review what happened. She just signed the papers and had security escort Grace out. That's fast. Too fast. And there's more. Winslow's financial records show 3 deposits over the past 14 months. Offshore accounts, Cayman Islands routing, totaling $1.2 million. Brannigan closed his eyes for a beat. When he opened them, they were colder than Grace had ever seen. "Where is Winslow now?" "3rd floor, her office. She hasn't left the building." "Bring her in, quietly." 1:37 a.m. Inside the trauma room, Grace sat motionless, holding the Admiral's hand. His heart rate had stabilized at 62 beats per minute. His oxygen levels were climbing. Color was returning to his face in slow, fragile increments. He was alive. Against every medical probability, against a chemical compound designed to kill without a trace, against a man who had spent 3 years planning his death, Admiral James Caldwell was alive. Grace watched his chest rise and fall. Each breath felt like a small victory. Each heartbeat felt like defiance. She heard the door open behind her. Brannigan stepped in, his face carrying the weight of something new. "Grace, I need to tell you something." She didn't turn around. "What?" Mercer didn't act alone inside this hospital. Now she turned. Brannigan's expression confirmed what his words implied. "Who else?" "Director Winslow. She took money from the same network that funded the Wraith ambush. She facilitated the ambulance redirect tonight, and she removed you from the Admiral's side on Mercer's orders." Grace stared at him. She thought about Winslow sitting behind that desk, reading glasses low, voice cold, sliding the termination papers across like she was filing a parking violation. "You endangered a federal asset." Those had been her words. Calculated, rehearsed. "She knew," Grace said quietly. "She knew what Mercer was doing. She knew the IV was contaminated. She knew I was the only person who could identify it. And she fired me to get me out of the way." Yes, Grace released the Admiral's hand and stood up. Her exhaustion was still there, bone deep, soul deep, but something else was rising through it. The same thing that had driven her into Trauma Room 4, when every instinct told her to stay invisible. The same thing that had made her chase a syringe across a hospital floor. The same thing that Torres had seen in her on the first day of medic training, when he'd said, "Sullivan, you don't quit. That's going to save someone's life someday." "I want to talk to her," Grace said. "That's not how this works." "I don't care how it works. She helped kill my squad. She helped try to kill the Admiral. And she looked me in the eye and fired me like I was nothing. I want to talk to her." Brannigan studied her face for a long moment. He saw something there that made him reconsider. Not rage, not revenge. Something more controlled, more dangerous. "5 minutes," he said. "I'll be in the room." 1:42 a.m. They brought Patricia Winslow to a conference room on the second floor. She sat upright, hands folded, chin high. She still wore the expression of institutional authority, the face of a woman who believed her title protected her. Grace walked in and sat across from her. Brannigan stood by the door, arms crossed. Winslow spoke first. "I don't know what you think is happening here, but I have done nothing wrong. I followed protocol. You violated procedure, and I terminated your employment accordingly." Grace said nothing. "I've been the director of this hospital for 11 years, Winslow continued. "I have an impeccable record. You can't just drag me into a room and interrogate me like some kind of criminal." Grace reached across the table and placed a single photograph in front of Winslow. The photo showed 12 people in combat gear, standing in front of a mud-walled compound in Afghanistan. 12 faces, 11 of them now dead. "Do you know who these people are?" Grace asked. Winslow glanced at the photo and looked away. "I don't see how this is relevant. These are the 12 members of SEAL Team 7's classified unit, Wraith. 11 of them were killed in an ambush in the Korengal Valley 3 years ago. An ambush that was coordinated by Dr. Nathan Mercer, your chief trauma surgeon, using intelligence he stole from a forward operating base. I have no knowledge of any of that. Tonight, Admiral James Caldwell was brought to your hospital after being shot 6 times. Dr. Mercer contaminated his IV with a chemical compound designed to stop his heart. When I discovered the contamination and saved the Admiral's life, you fired me within 20 minutes on Mercer's recommendation. No review, no investigation, no due process. I followed protocol, Winslow repeated, but her voice had thinned. Grace leaned forward. Your bank records show 3 offshore deposits totaling $1.2 million over the past 14 months, routed through the Cayman Islands, from a shell company connected to the same defense contractors who paid Mercer to sell out my unit. Winslow's face went white. Not slowly, all at once, like someone had pulled a plug. Her composure cracked down the middle. That information is private. You have no right. An ambulance dispatch was redirected tonight at 21:15. Grace continued, voice steady, relentless. The call came from a blocked number to the hospital switchboard. The Admiral was supposed to go to Walter Reed, where he would have been surrounded by military medical staff who couldn't be compromised. Instead, he came here, to Mercer's hospital, to your hospital. I wasn't involved in that. Mercer called your personal cell phone at 21:08 tonight, 7 minutes after the shooting, 3 minutes before the redirect. What did he say to you? Winslow's mouth opened. Nothing came out. She looked at Brannigan, then back at Grace, and for the first time, the institutional authority fell away completely, and underneath it was something small and terrified and ugly. I want a lawyer, she said. Grace stood up. She looked down at Winslow with an expression that held no anger, no satisfaction, no triumph. Just the tired, heavy sadness of a woman who had learned a long time ago that the people who kill you are sometimes the people who smile at you in the hallway. 11 people, Grace said. They had families. They had names. and you helped the man who killed them." Grace walked out of the room without looking back. 1:51 a.m. She returned to Trauma Room 4. The Admiral's vitals were holding steady. 2 nurses attended him now, checking levels, adjusting medications. They looked at Grace differently when she entered. Not with suspicion, not with confusion, with something closer to reverence. Grace ignored it. She pulled the chair back to his bedside and sat down. She took his hand again. His fingers twitched, weak, barely perceptible, but intentional. Grace held tighter. "I'm here, sir." The Admiral's eyes opened. Not fully, just a crack, but enough. His lips moved. No sound at first. Then, in a voice that sounded like sandpaper dragged across gravel, "Sullivan." Grace's throat closed. Tears spilled before she could stop them. "Yeah, it's me. You kept your promise." "I kept my promise." His eyes focused on her face, hazy but present. "How bad?" "6 gunshots, a chemical compound in your IV. Your heart stopped twice. You've been dead and alive and dead again in the last 3 hours." A ghost of a smile crossed his cracked lips. "Sounds about right. For a Tuesday," Grace laughed. It came out broken and wet and raw, but it was a laugh. The first real one in 3 years. The Admiral's eyes drifted to the door. "Mercer?" "In custody." "Winslow?" "In custody." Caldwell exhaled slowly. His eyes found hers again. "The files. From the Korengal. Did they?" "They have everything, sir. Brannigan's team recovered it all. Your testimony is still needed, but the evidence exists. Wraith's mission wasn't for nothing." The Admiral's hand tightened around hers, barely any pressure, but it was there. "It was never for nothing," he whispered. "Not as long as you're alive." Grace pressed her forehead against their joined hands and let herself cry. Not the controlled, silent tears of a woman who was trained to survive. Real tears. Loud. Messy. 3 years of grief pouring out in a hospital room at 2 in the morning. The Admiral didn't speak again. He didn't need to. He just held her hand with the last of his strength and let her break. 1:58 a.m. Brannigan's radio crackled. He stepped into the hallway and listened. "Sir, we traced the 4th call on Mercer's burner, the blocked number." "Who is it?" "It's a sat phone, registered to a private security firm based in McLean, Virginia. The firm is a front for a consortium of 5 former defense contractors. All 5 have been under investigation by a sealed Senate subcommittee for the past 18 months. Names? Working on it, but sir, there's something else. The sat phone pinged a cell tower 9 minutes ago. Where? A pause that lasted too long. 300 yards from this hospital, and it's still active. Brannigan's hand went to his weapon. He looked through the window into the trauma room, where Grace sat holding the Admiral's hand, unaware that the people who wanted them both dead were close enough to hear their heartbeats. He keyed his radio. "All teams, code black. We have a hostile element within 300 yards of the hospital. Lock everything down. Nothing moves. Nobody leaves." Then he walked to the trauma room door, opened it, and said 2 words that made Grace's blood run cold. "They're here." Grace released the Admiral's hand and stood up so fast the chair skidded backward. "How many?" Brannigan held up his radio. "Unknown. We tracked a sat phone signal 300 yards from the building. It's still active. Could be one person. Could be a team." "It's a team," Grace said. "Mercer was their inside man. When he failed, they'd send a cleanup crew. That's how they operated in Afghanistan. Redundancy on top of redundancy." "How do you know that?" "Because Commander Reyes figured it out the night before we died. He said, 'These people don't leave loose ends. If the first plan fails, there's always a second. If the second fails, they burn everything.' We didn't listen. 24 hours later, our entire unit was gone." Brannigan grabbed her arm. "We need to move the Admiral. Right now." "He can't be moved. He just came back from Flatline. His cardiac tissue is barely functioning. If you put him in a vehicle, the vibration alone could throw him back into arrest. If we leave him here and a kill team breaches this building, he's dead anyway. Grace looked at the Admiral. His eyes were closed again. His breathing was shallow but steady. The monitors showed a fragile rhythm, 61 beats per minute, the kind of number that looked stable on a screen but meant almost nothing in practice. One shock, one sudden movement, one wrong medication, that's all it would take. Then we don't move him, Grace said. We fortify this room and we hold it. 2:03 a.m. Brannigan positioned 6 agents on the trauma floor, 2 at each stairwell entrance, 2 in the corridor outside Trauma Room 4. He cleared all non-essential staff from the floor and ordered the elevators locked. Every nurse, doctor, and orderly on the 3rd floor was escorted to the 1st floor cafeteria under guard. Grace stayed with the Admiral. She checked his vitals manually every 30 seconds. Heart rate 62, blood pressure 94/60, oxygen saturation 95%. Numbers that meant survival, barely, if nothing else went wrong. Everything else was about to go wrong. Brannigan's radio crackled. Perimeter team to base. We've got movement in the east parking structure. 4 individuals. Tactical gear. They're carrying. Brannigan keyed back. Weapons confirmed? Affirmative. Suppressed rifles. They're moving toward the service entrance on the ground floor. Grace heard the transmission through the open door. Her body reacted before her mind caught up. Spine straight, shoulders squared, eyes scanning. She was back in the Korengal Valley, and the kill team was coming. 4 isn't a cleanup crew, she said to Brannigan. 4 is an advance element. There are more. How do you know? Because 4 operators can't hold a hospital. They can breach it. They can clear a single floor. But they can't hold the building against your team and get out. They're not here to fight. They're here to penetrate, kill the target, and extract before you can respond. That means there's a vehicle waiting and another team covering their exit. Brannigan stared at her for a half second, then grabbed his radio. All units, expand the perimeter. Check for a secondary element outside the building. Look for a vehicle positioned for rapid extraction. Cover the west and north exits. 2:07 a.m. The first gunshot echoed through the hospital at exactly 2:07. Not loud, suppressed. A soft, lethal pop that sounded like a textbook closing. But Grace knew that sound the way she knew her own heartbeat. A voice on the radio. Alpha 6 is down. Ground floor, east corridor. They're inside. Brannigan drew his weapon. How fast can they reach the 3rd floor? Grace did the math in her head. If they know the layout, and they do because Mercer gave it to them, 90 seconds through the east stairwell, maybe less. Then we have 90 seconds. Grace turned to the Admiral. His eyes were open again, thin slits, barely conscious, but aware. Sullivan, he rasped, what's happening? They sent a team, sir. They're in the building. Caldwell's jaw tightened. Even half dead, even pumped full of toxins and riddled with bullet wounds, the operator in him surfaced. How many? At least 4 inside, unknown outside. Weapons? I don't have one. The Admiral looked at her with those steel gray eyes that had seen more combat than most generals. Then get one. Grace turned to Brannigan. Give me a weapon. Absolutely not. You're a civilian. I'm Petty Officer First Class Grace Sullivan, and I have more combat hours than half the agents in this building. Give me a weapon, or those 4 men are going to walk through that door and put a bullet in the Admiral's head while you explain protocol to me. Brannigan reached to his ankle holster, pulled a compact Glock 19, checked the chamber, and handed it to her grip first. Grace took it. The weight was familiar. Terrible. Comforting. Don't make me regret this, Brannigan said. You won't. 2:09 a.m. The second shot came from closer. Same floor. Someone screamed. Then silence. Bravo 2, report, Brannigan ordered into his radio. Nothing. Bravo 2, report. Static. Grace positioned herself between the door and the Admiral's bed. She held the Glock low and ready, both hands firm, finger indexed along the frame. Her breathing slowed, her vision sharpened. The trembling in her hands, which had been constant since Mercer first locked eyes with her hours ago, stopped completely. This she knew. This was not nursing. This was not hiding. This was the thing she had been trained to do since she was 21 years old. The thing she had tried to forget. The thing her body refused to release. Footsteps in the corridor, fast, controlled, the practiced movement of men who knew how to clear a building. "They're on the floor," Grace said. Brannigan took position on the opposite side of the door. "Alpha team, I need backup on 3. They've reached the trauma floor." "Copy. 60 seconds out." "We don't have 60 seconds, Grace said. The door to the trauma room had a narrow window. Grace watched it. Shadows moved in the corridor. Close. Getting closer. Then the lights went out. The entire floor plunged into darkness. Emergency generators kicked in after 2 seconds, bathing everything in dim red light. The monitors on the Admiral's bed flickered but held. "They cut the main power," Grace said. "They want confusion. They want your agents disoriented. My agents are trained for this. So are they." 2:11 a.m. The first operator hit the door. He didn't kick it open. He pushed it open smoothly, weapon first, sweeping left. Professional, controlled. The way you enter a room when you've done it 1,000 times. Grace fired once. The round caught him in the shoulder. He spun sideways and dropped to one knee. A second operator pushed in behind him, using the first as a shield. Grace fired again. The round hit the doorframe. Brannigan opened fire from the opposite side, hitting the second operator in the chest plate. The man staggered but didn't fall. Body armor. "Armor!" Grace shouted. She adjusted her aim. Lower. The legs. She fired twice. One round hit the second operator's thigh. He collapsed. The first operator, still on one knee, raised his rifle toward the Admiral's bed. Grace saw the barrel swing toward Caldwell's motionless body. She didn't think. She stepped into the line of fire, placing herself directly between the shooter and the Admiral, and fired 3 rounds. 2 hit center mass. The third hit his weapon, knocking it from his hands. He wasn't dead. The body armor held, but he was down, gasping, stunned. Brannigan rushed forward and kicked the rifle away. "Secure them, now!" 2 agents from the stairwell stormed in, zip-tying the downed operators. Grace kept her weapon trained on the door. 2 down. At least 2 more somewhere on the floor. "Where are the others?" Brannigan demanded from the wounded operator. The man said nothing. Blood seeped from his thigh onto the floor. Grace knelt beside him. She pressed her thumb into the gunshot wound on his shoulder. Hard. The man groaned through clenched teeth. "I was a combat medic," Grace said, her face inches from his. "I know exactly how much pressure to apply to this wound before you lose the use of this arm permanently. Where are the other 2? He held out for 4 seconds. Then he broke. "Service corridor, heading for the south stairwell. They're going to loop around." Grace stood up. "They're flanking us." "I'll send agents to intercept," Brannigan started. "There's no time. The south stairwell connects directly to this hallway. He'll be here in 45 seconds. Grace looked at the Admiral. His eyes were on her. Fully open now, clear. He had heard everything. He had watched her take 2 armed operators while standing between them and his bed. "Go," he said. His voice was barely a whisper, but the command in it was absolute. "I'll still be here when you get back." Grace ran. 2:14 a.m. She moved through the corridor in the red emergency light, Glock up, back against the wall, clearing each intersection the way she'd been taught at Coronado. The hospital was silent except for the hum of generators and the distant wail of police sirens outside. Every shadow was a threat. Every doorway was an ambush point. She reached the south stairwell door and pressed her ear against it. Footsteps. 2 sets. Coming up. close. Grace backed away from the door, positioned herself at an angle that gave her a clear line of fire when it opened, and waited. Her heart hammered. Sweat ran down her temple. The Glock felt like an extension of her hand. The door opened. The third operator came through fast and low, weapons sweeping right. He didn't see her. She was on his left, in a shadow he hadn't checked. Grace grabbed the barrel of his rifle and yanked it upward. The shot went into the ceiling. She drove her knee into his solar plexus and slammed the butt of the Glock against his temple. He dropped. The fourth operator was right behind him. He saw Grace and reacted instantly, swinging his rifle toward her. Grace threw herself sideways. The round tore through the air where her head had been a half second ago and punched into the wall behind her. She hit the ground, rolled, and fired from the floor. 2 rounds. One hit his knee. He screamed and buckled. Grace was on her feet before he hit the ground. She kicked his weapon away and pressed the Glock against the back of his head. "Don't move." He didn't. Agents arrived 15 seconds later. They cuffed both operators and dragged them to the secured area. Grace stood in the hallway, chest heaving, hands shaking now that the adrenaline was receding. She looked down at herself. Her scrubs were torn. The Admiral's dried blood was still on her hands, mixed now with her own sweat and the gunpowder residue that stained her fingers. She walked back to Trauma Room 4. 2:18 a.m. Brannigan met her at the door. "All 4 operators are in custody. Perimeter team caught 2 more outside in a van on Edison Street. They had a secondary extraction plan, just like you said." 6 total, Grace said. "That's a full team. That's a full team for a high-value target assassination. These aren't amateurs. Former Special Activities Division, CIA trained. Whoever sent them had access to serious resources." Grace leaned against the wall. Her legs were shaking. "Mercer's handlers, the contractors. We need names, Grace." Mercer lawyered up the second we got him to the holding facility. "Winslow is talking, but she only knows Mercer. She doesn't know who's above him. The Admiral knows." They both looked into the trauma room. Caldwell was awake, more awake than he had been all night. His eyes tracked them through the window with the sharp, focused gaze of a man whose mind had never stopped working, even when his body was failing. Grace walked in. She pulled the chair to his bedside and sat down. "Sir, they sent a kill team tonight. 6 operators. We stopped them. But Brannigan needs to know who's running this." Caldwell's breathing was labored, each word costing him visible effort. "How much do they have?" "They know about the weapons shipment Wraith intercept. They know about Mercer's role. They know about the contractors. But they don't have the names at the top." The Admiral closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, they were wet. Not from pain, from something deeper. "I've been carrying this for 3 years, Sullivan. Every night, every morning, 11 faces. I knew who killed them within 6 months. I had the names, I had the evidence. But every time I tried to push it up the chain, someone blocked it, someone classified it, someone made it disappear." "Who?" "The contract that Wraith uncovered was worth $4.7 billion. Guidance systems sold to a foreign power through 3 layers of shell companies. The profits were split between 5 former defense contractors and 2 sitting members of the Senate Armed Services Committee." Grace stopped breathing. "Senators?" "Senator Roland Kessler of Virginia and Senator Dianne Whitfield of Texas. They authorized the deal through back channels. When your commander found the shipment and I transmitted the evidence to JSOC, Kessler's people intercepted the transmission. Within 48 hours, they activated Mercer, and Wraith was gone." 2:24 a.m. Grace sat in absolute silence. The monitor beeped steadily behind her. The Admiral breathed in ragged, painful pulls of air, and the names hung in the room like smoke. 2 senators, she finally said. 2 senators who sit on the committee that oversees military operations, intelligence budgets, and defense contracts. 2 senators who have the power to classify evidence, redirect investigations, and make people disappear. That's why nothing happened for 3 years. That's why I couldn't get a hearing. That's why they tried to kill me tonight. Because tomorrow morning at 0900, I'm scheduled to testify in front of a sealed session that they couldn't block. The first one they couldn't block. How? A junior senator from Michigan named Alvarez. He found a procedural loophole, got the hearing scheduled before Kessler and Whitfield could intervene. They had 6 hours notice. That's why tonight was so desperate. They're out of moves. Grace looked at Brannigan through the window. He was already on the phone, his face drained of color. He had been listening through the open door. She turned back to the Admiral. Can you still testify? Caldwell looked at her the way a dying man looks at the last thing he loves. I can barely breathe, Sullivan. I've been shot 6 times and poisoned twice. My heart stopped 3 times tonight. That's not what I asked. A pause. Then that ghost of a smile again, the one that made him look like the man she remembered from the FOB. The man who drank bad coffee and told worse jokes and would walk through fire for any of them without hesitation. Yeah, he said, I can testify, but I need you there. I need you in that room. You're the only other living witness who can corroborate what Wraith found. Your testimony alongside mine makes the case bulletproof. I'm supposed to be dead. So am I. Let's be dead together. 2:31 a.m. Brannigan ended his call and walked into the room. His face was tight, controlled, but Grace could see the strain behind his eyes. I just spoke with the deputy director of the DIA. He's authorized a secure medical transport for the Admiral to a classified facility in Maryland. We leave in 30 minutes. A military medical team is en route. What about the hearing? Grace asked. The hearing is at 0900 at a secure location on Capitol Hill. If the Admiral is medically stable enough to speak, we put him in front of the committee. If not, he'll be there, Grace said. Brannigan looked at Caldwell. Admiral, with all due respect, you've been clinically dead 3 times tonight. And with all due respect, Agent, I've been waiting 3 years to say the names of the men who murdered my people. I'll testify from a wheelchair. I'll testify from a stretcher. I'll testify from a body bag if I have to. But I'm going to that hearing. Brannigan exhaled through his nose. All right, we move in 30. Grace, you're coming with us. Your cover is blown. Mercer's people know you're alive. Your apartment, your car, your bank accounts, everything connected to your civilian identity is compromised. Grace nodded. She had known this was coming the moment she stepped into the SUV hours ago. The life she had built, the small apartment in Arlington, the fake resume, the quiet shifts, the invisible existence, all of it was gone. She had pulled it apart with her own hands the second she ripped that IV line from the Admiral's arm. She didn't mourn it. That life had never been real. It had been a hiding place. And hiding places eventually collapse. There's something else, Brannigan said. He hesitated, which was unusual for him. Grace noticed. What? When we brought Winslow in for questioning, she gave us something. Voluntarily, she said Mercer kept a safe in his office, behind a panel in the wall. She said he told her once, when he was drunk, that the safe contained his insurance policy. His words. Insurance against the contractors. That's what we think. We sent a team to Mercer's office 20 minutes ago. They found the safe. It was open. Empty. Grace felt the air change. Someone got there first. Someone got there first. And the security footage for that corridor was wiped remotely at 1:47 a.m. while we were fighting the kill team. Yes, the assault on the hospital wasn't just about the Admiral. It was a distraction. While every agent in the building was focused on the 3rd floor, someone walked into Mercer's office on the 1st floor, emptied the safe, and walked out. 2:38 a.m. Grace's mind worked through it. The kill team, 6 operators, a full assault on a guarded hospital. Expensive, dangerous, high risk. Why would the contractors risk that much manpower just to kill one man when they could have waited, tried again later, used a subtler approach? Because the assault wasn't the primary objective. The Admiral was the decoy. They sacrificed the kill team, Grace said slowly. They sent 6 men into a hospital full of federal agents, knowing they'd probably be caught or killed. Because they didn't care about the team. They cared about the safe. Mercer's insurance policy, whatever it is more dangerous to them than the Admiral's testimony. Brannigan stared at her. That means whatever was in that safe could bring them down even without the Admiral. And now they have it, and they're going to destroy it. Unless we find whoever took it before they do. Grace looked at the Admiral. He was watching her with an expression she had seen only once before. In the Korengal Valley, when Commander Reyes had pieced together the truth about the weapons shipment just hours before the ambush. The expression of a man watching someone see the whole board for the first time. "You're thinking like Reyes," Caldwell said quietly. He would have seen it the same way. Grace felt the weight of that name in her chest. Reyes, the commander who trusted her, who trained her, who died calling her name through smoke and fire. "Then let's finish what he started," she said. 2:42 a.m. Brannigan's phone rang. He looked at the screen and his jaw clenched. Brannigan. He listened for 12 seconds. His face changed. Not surprise. Something worse. Resignation. "Copy. Hold him there." He hung up and turned to Grace. Nathan Mercer just attempted suicide in federal custody. He used a cyanide capsule embedded in a false molar. Standard issue for deep cover operatives. Grace's stomach dropped. "Is he dead?" "No. The guards caught it in time. He's unconscious but alive." "But Grace, there's something you need to know." Before he bit down on the capsule, he said something to the guard. One sentence. "What did he say?" Brannigan's voice was barely above a whisper. He said, "Ask Sullivan about the 12th body." Grace's world tilted. The room swam. She grabbed the edge of the Admiral's bed to keep from falling. The 12th body. In the Korengal Valley, after the ambush, recovery teams found 11 bodies. 11 members of Wraith. The 12th, Grace, had survived and disappeared. That was the official count. 11 dead, 1 missing, presumed killed. But Mercer didn't say the 12th survivor. He said the 12th body, which meant there was a body that was never accounted for. A body that shouldn't have been there. A body that someone went to great lengths to make disappear. Grace looked at the Admiral. His face had gone pale, not from his wounds, from something else, something old, something he had been carrying even longer than the names of the contractors. "Admiral," Grace said, her voice barely holding together, "what is the 12th body?" Caldwell closed his eyes. His heart rate climbed on the monitor. 65, 68, 72. The numbers of a man whose body was reacting to a truth his mind had been suppressing. "When I pulled you out of the wreckage," he said slowly, "I saw something. In the blast crater. A body that wasn't wearing Wraith gear. A body in civilian clothes. I didn't have time to check. I grabbed you and ran." "Who was it?" "I went back later, after you disappeared, after the recovery teams left. I went back to the crater alone. The body was gone, but I found a wallet buried in the rubble. Burned, barely readable. The ID inside belonged to a man named Marcus Webb." Grace didn't recognize the name. "Who is Marcus Webb?" The Admiral opened his eyes. They were full of something Grace had never seen in them before. Fear. Marcus Webb was a congressional aide to Senator Roland Kessler, and according to every official record, Marcus Webb has been dead for 4 years. He died in a car accident in Georgetown 2 years before the Korengal ambush. A dead man was at the ambush site. A dead man who worked for the senator who ordered the ambush. A dead man whose body was removed before anyone could identify it. A dead man who might not be dead at all. Grace's hands gripped the bedrail until her knuckles cracked. "And you think Marcus Webb is the one who emptied Mercer's safe tonight?" The Admiral held her gaze. "I think Marcus Webb has been cleaning up after Senator Kessler for for a very long time. And I think he's the most dangerous person in this entire operation, because nobody is looking for a man who's already dead. 2:49 a.m. Grace stood in the middle of Trauma Room 4, surrounded by agents and monitors, and the steady beep of a heart she had restarted 3 times. And she felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Not from exhaustion, not from fear, from the sickening realization that this was bigger than Mercer, bigger than Winslow, bigger than a hospital and a kill team and a contaminated IV line. This reached into the United States Senate, into the halls where laws were made and wars were authorized, into the offices of men and women who swore oaths to protect the nation and then sold its soldiers for profit. And somewhere out there, right now, a ghost named Marcus Webb was carrying the one piece of evidence that could prove all of it. And he was running. Grace looked at Brannigan. We need to find Marcus Webb before sunrise. We don't even know what he looks like. The Admiral saw him in the crater, and Mercer knew about him, which means the safe had something connected to Webb. A photo, a contact, something Mercer kept as leverage. Mercer is unconscious. Then wake him up. Brannigan shook his head. He's in a medically induced coma. The cyanide damaged his nervous system. Doctors say he won't be conscious for at least 48 hours. Grace slammed her palm against the wall. The sound echoed through the room. The nurses flinched. Brannigan didn't. We have 7 hours until the hearing, Grace said. 7 hours to find a man nobody knows is alive, recover evidence we can't identify, and keep the Admiral breathing long enough to say the names that will end this. She looked at Caldwell. He looked at her. And between them, in the silence that followed, was the understanding that had been forged in a burning valley 3 years ago. The understanding between 2 people who had already died once and come back. 2 people who had nothing left to lose and everything left to fight for. 7 hours, the Admiral said. We've done more with less. Grace wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing blood and tears across her cheek. She straightened her shoulders. She checked the Glock at her side. Yeah, she said, we have. 3:04 a.m. The military medical transport arrived at Fort Mercy in a convoy of armored vehicles that made Brannigan's SUVs look like sedans. A team of Navy physicians boarded the trauma floor, took one look at the Admiral's chart, and immediately began stabilizing him for transfer. Grace stood beside the stretcher as they worked, watching every IV line they hung, checking every medication they administered, trusting no one. Sullivan, the Admiral's voice was thin but firm, stop checking their IVs. These are my people. Your people almost killed you tonight, sir. Different people, he caught her eye. These ones I trust. Grace forced herself to step back. Her hands were shaking again, not from fear, from the slow, grinding crash of adrenaline that had been sustaining her for the last 4 hours. Her body was failing. Her mind refused to follow. Brannigan appeared at her side. We found something. Yates pulled the hospital's external security feeds from the south lot. Cameras that Mercer didn't know about because they were installed 3 weeks ago as part of a city traffic study. And a man exited through the south service door at 1:49 a.m., 2 minutes after the kill team breached the east entrance. He was carrying a small case, dark jacket, baseball cap, walked directly to a silver Honda Accord parked in the visitor lot, got in, and drove north on Washington Boulevard. Plate number? Partial. First 4 characters. Yates ran them against every registration in the DMV database. 14 matches in the Virginia, Maryland, D.C. area. That's too many. It was, until we cross-referenced with properties rented under shell companies linked to Kessler's network. One match, a silver Honda Accord registered to a company called Meridian Consulting, LLC, incorporated in Delaware. Same state, same registered agent as the shell company that paid Mercer. Grace felt the thread tighten. Where's the car now? That's the problem. We lost it on Washington Boulevard. No traffic cameras on that stretch for a quarter mile. He could have turned off anywhere. Where does the registration lead? There has to be an address. A storage unit, Herndon, Virginia, 23 minutes from here. 3:11 a.m. Grace rode in the lead vehicle. Brannigan sat beside her, coordinating teams through 3 different encrypted channels. Behind them, the Admiral's medical transport headed north toward the classified facility in Maryland, flanked by 4 armored escorts. Grace stared at the Glock in her lap. She hadn't put it down since Brannigan gave it to her. She wasn't sure she could. "Tell me about Marcus Webb," she said. Brannigan pulled up a file on his tablet. Congressional aide to Senator Kessler from 2016 to 2019. Specialized in defense appropriations. Had top-secret clearance. Officially died in a single-vehicle accident on the Key Bridge in January 2019. Body was recovered from the Potomac. Closed casket funeral. No autopsy. No autopsy. Kessler personally called the D.C. medical examiner and requested the case be expedited. Family was told the body was too damaged for viewing because there was no body or the wrong body. That's our working theory. Webb faked his death, or Kessler faked it for him, and he's been operating as a ghost ever since, cleaning up, eliminating loose ends, doing the work that Mercer couldn't do from inside a hospital. Grace thought about that. A man who had been dead for 6 years, a man with no identity, no records, no digital footprint, a man who could walk into a hospital during a firefight, open a safe, take what he needed, and walk out without a single person knowing he existed. "He's good," Grace said. "He's a professional." No, he's better than a professional. Professionals leave traces. Webb walked through a building full of federal agents and security cameras and left nothing. That's not training, that's instinct. Brannigan looked at her. "You sound like you respect him." "I respect anyone who can disappear that completely. I did it for 3 years. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than combat, harder than watching people die. Because you're killing yourself, slowly, every single day. You're erasing who you are, and the longer you do it, the less of you is left." She paused. "Webb has been doing it for 6 years. Whatever's left of him isn't a person anymore. It's a function, and that makes him more dangerous than Mercer ever was." 3:27 a.m. The convoy reached the storage facility in Herndon, a sprawling complex of gray buildings behind a chain-link fence. Brannigan's team had already secured the perimeter. An agent met them at the gate. "Unit 247, rented 18 months ago under Meridian Consulting. Paid in cash. No contact information on file." Grace walked with Brannigan and 4 agents to the unit. The door was a standard roll-up, padlock from the outside. An agent cut the lock. They raised the door. Inside was almost empty. A folding table, a metal chair, a laptop closed, sitting on the table. And on the wall, taped in a single row, 11 photographs. Grace stopped breathing. The photographs were of her squad. Not military photos, surveillance photos, taken at the FOB in Afghanistan. Silva eating lunch, Garrett cleaning his weapon, Commander Reyes studying a map, Torres teaching a medic technique to a young corpsman, Holt laughing at something off camera. Each photograph had a red X drawn across the face. Except one, the last photo in the row, Grace's face taken from a distance through what looked like a telephoto lens. No red X. Instead, a single word written in black marker beneath it. Alive. Grace's knees buckled. Brannigan caught her arm. She pulled free, walked to the wall, and pressed her fingers against Torres's photograph. His smile, that stupid, brilliant, beautiful smile he wore every single day, even in a war zone, even when everything was falling apart. "He's been tracking me," Grace whispered. "This whole time, Webb knew I was alive." "Which means Kessler knew too." Grace spun toward Brannigan. "If Kessler knew I was alive, why didn't he send someone to kill me sooner?" "Because you weren't a threat. You were hiding. You weren't talking, weren't testifying, weren't going to anyone. As long as you stayed invisible, you were harmless. And tonight I stopped being invisible. Tonight you saved the Admiral in front of 30 witnesses and revealed skills that don't belong to a rookie nurse. You put yourself back on the board. And now they have to deal with you. Grace turned back to the photographs. Her hands trembled. Webb has been watching all of us. Mercer, the Admiral, me. He's been the eye, the one who sees everything and reports back to Kessler. An agent opened the laptop. It's unlocked. There are files here. Encrypted, but we can see the directory structure. What's in it? Grace asked. The agent scrolled through. Hundreds of files. Financial records, communication logs, mission reports, and, he stopped scrolling, there's a video folder, 43 files, dated the night of the Korangal ambush. Grace's heart stopped. 43 videos, timestamp starting at 2200 hours and running through 0300. Somebody recorded the entire ambush. 3:34 a.m. Grace watched the first video on the laptop screen. Shaky footage, shot from an elevated position overlooking the valley. She could see the convoy, her convoy. Wraith's vehicles moving along the route that Commander Reyes had planned with meticulous precision. Then the first IED detonated. The lead vehicle lifted off the ground, fire erupted, and the camera didn't flinch. Whoever was holding it stood steady, watching, recording, as 11 Americans were torn apart. Grace heard sounds she had buried for 3 years. Screams, gunfire, explosions, the crack of RPG rounds finding their targets. Torres's voice shouting medical commands before the second blast cut him off forever. She slammed the laptop shut. Her chest heaved. Her vision tunneled. For a moment she was back there, in the dirt, in the fire, in the place where everything ended. Brannigan put his hand on her shoulder. Grace. He filmed it. Her voice was raw, scraped hollow. Webb stood on that ridge and filmed my team dying, and he kept the footage for 6 years. As leverage, against Kessler, against the contractors, against anyone who might turn on the operation. Mercer's insurance policy. This is what was in the safe, not documents, the laptop. Webb stored it in Mercer's safe because the hospital was the last place anyone would look. And tonight, when things went sideways, Webb took it back. But he didn't take it far enough. He left it here. Grace looked around the storage unit. The emptiness, the single chair, the photographs on the wall. This wasn't a storage unit. This was an office, a workspace, the place where Marcus Webb came to do his real job. He's coming back, Grace said. He left the laptop because he's not done. There's something else he needs, something he hasn't finished. What? Grace looked at her own photograph on the wall, the word beneath it, alive, and she understood with a clarity that cut through her exhaustion like a blade. Me. He's coming back for me. I'm the last loose end. The Admiral is in a secured convoy surrounded by agents, but I'm standing in an open storage unit in Herndon, Virginia, at 3 in the morning with my face on his wall. Brannigan's radio crackled before he could respond. Perimeter team, we have a vehicle approaching from the north. Silver Honda Accord, matches the partial plate. Grace picked up the Glock. He's here. 3:38 a.m. Brannigan moved fast. He ordered agents to concealed positions around the unit. Grace pressed against the interior wall, weapon ready, heart pounding. The storage unit's light was killed. They waited in darkness. The car stopped outside the fence. 30 seconds passed. The engine idled. Then it shut off. A door opened and closed. Footsteps on gravel, slow and measured. Grace controlled her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The way Torres taught her before every mission. Fear is just adrenaline without direction, Sullivan. Give it a job. The footsteps stopped outside Unit 247. Silence. Then a voice, quiet and calm. I know you're in there, Agent Brannigan. I can see the boot prints in the gravel. At least 6 agents. Standard DIA perimeter formation. You really should vary your protocols. Brannigan signaled his team. Weapons up. I'm not armed, the voice continued. I'm going to open the door and walk in. If you shoot me, you lose the only copy of the evidence that will convict Senator Kessler. I have a flash drive in my coat pocket. It contains everything from this laptop, plus 3 years of additional documentation, financial transfers, recorded conversations, Senate communications, everything. Brannigan looked at Grace. She shook her head slowly. Something wasn't right. Why? Grace called out. Why would you turn it over? A pause. Then the voice, and it was different now, softer, more human than she expected. Because I'm tired, Petty Officer Sullivan. I've been dead for 6 years, and being dead is exhausting. 3:41 a.m. The door rolled up. A man stood in the opening, average height, average build, brown hair going gray, a face designed to be forgotten. He wore a dark jacket, khaki pants, and the expression of a man who had reached the end of a very long road. He looked at Grace, not at the agents, not at the weapons, at her. You don't know me, he said, but I know you. I've been watching you for 3 years. I watched you take the bus to work. I watched you eat lunch alone in the hospital cafeteria. I watched you sit in your car after every shift and cry for 10 minutes before driving home. Grace's throat tightened. You were in the valley. You filmed the ambush. Yes. You watched my team die. Yes. Why? Webb stepped inside. Agents closed in behind him, but he didn't seem to notice or care. Because Senator Kessler ordered me to document the operation. He wanted proof that the problem had been eliminated. He wanted to watch it. And I did what I was told because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. You helped kill 11 people because you were afraid? I helped kill 11 people because I was a coward. I've known that for 6 years. You don't need to tell me. He reached into his coat pocket, slowly, and pulled out a flash drive. He held it out to Brannigan. Everything is on there. Names, dates, amounts, communications, the video footage, and my own testimony, recorded yesterday. Every detail of what Kessler and Whitfield did. Every detail of what I did. Brannigan took the flash drive. Why now? Why tonight? Webb looked at Grace again. Because 3 years ago, I was standing on a ridge in Afghanistan, watching that valley burn, and I saw the Admiral crawl into the wreckage to pull out a woman who should have been dead. He carried her half a mile under fire. I could have stopped him. I could have called in the coordinates. I didn't. Why not? Webb's voice cracked for the first time. Because I watched her face. Through the scope, she was unconscious, covered in blood, and she looked like my daughter. My daughter who thinks I died in a car accident. My daughter who laid flowers on an empty grave every year for her birthday. Tears ran down his face. He didn't wipe them. I let you live, Sullivan. That was the first human decision I made in years. And every day since then, I've been trying to figure out how to make the rest of them. 3:47 a.m. They took Webb into custody, not roughly, not gently, professionally. He went without resistance, without drama, with the quiet resignation of a man who had been holding his breath for 6 years, and finally exhaled. Grace watched them put him in the back of an SUV. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel satisfaction. She felt something complicated and terrible that she couldn't name. The man who had filmed her teammates dying was also the man who had let her live. The man who served a corrupt senator was also a father who missed his daughter. The world didn't sort into clean categories the way she wanted it to. Brannigan walked up beside her. The flash drive is real. Yates confirmed the files. It's everything, Grace. Financial records connecting Kessler and Whitfield to the defense contractors. Recordings of Senate communications authorizing the weapons deal. And the video footage from the Korengal. All 43 files. The hearing is in 5 hours. 4 hours and 52 minutes. Is the Admiral stable? The medical team reports his vitals are holding. They've administered a counteragent for Mercer's compound. His cardiac function is improving. He's awake. He's asking for you. 5:15 a.m. The classified facility in Maryland was a low concrete building with no windows and no sign. Grace was escorted through 3 security checkpoints before she reached the Admiral's room. He was propped up in a hospital bed, connected to monitors, but his eyes were sharp, and his color was better than she'd seen all night. "You look terrible, Sullivan. You should see the other guys." He almost laughed. It turned into a cough. Grace handed him water. "Webb turned himself in," she said. "He had everything. The files from Mercer's safe, plus his own documentation. The DIA has it all." The Admiral closed his eyes. "Webb. I always wondered who was on that ridge. He said he let me live because I reminded him of his daughter. Funny, I carried you out because you reminded me of mine." Grace hadn't known the Admiral had a daughter. In 3 years of remembering him, of carrying his voice in her head, of replaying every moment they shared in Afghanistan, she had never known that simple fact. "She's 24, Caldwell said, reading her expression. "Lives in San Diego. Hasn't spoken to me in 2 years. She thinks I chose the Navy over her." He paused. She wasn't wrong. After today, maybe she'll understand why. Maybe, or maybe she'll just know that her father almost got himself killed trying to make up for getting other people killed. His eyes opened. "I should have pushed harder, Sullivan. 3 years ago, I should have gone to the press, gone public, gone loud. Instead, I played the system. I filed reports, I went through channels, and the channels ate everything I gave them because the channels were owned by the people I was trying to expose. You're here now, sir. That's what matters. We're both here, against some pretty impressive odds." He reached for her hand. She gave it. His grip was weak, but real. "I need you to know something before we go in there today. Whatever happens in that hearing room, whether they believe us or dismiss us or classify everything again, what happened in the Korengal wasn't your fault. It wasn't my fault. 11 people died because powerful men decided their profits mattered more than American lives. That guilt belongs to them, not to us." Grace felt the tears come again. She thought she had run out. She was wrong. "I hear their voices," she said. "Every night, Torres telling me to check the IV, Reyes telling me to stay focused, Holt making some stupid joke about the food. I hear them too. Does it ever stop? No, but it changes. It stops being a haunting and starts being a conversation. They stay with you, but they stop hurting you. That's the best I can promise." 8:47 a.m. The hearing room was underground. No windows, no cameras. A single long table where 7 senators sat, including Senator Alvarez from Michigan, the man who had made this hearing possible. Armed guards stood at every door. A court reporter sat in the corner, fingers poised. Senator Kessler was not present. Neither was Senator Whitfield. Brannigan had informed Grace 30 minutes ago that both senators had been taken into federal custody at 7:15 a.m., arrested at their homes by teams from the FBI and the DIA simultaneously. Admiral Caldwell was wheeled in on a hospital bed. 2 Navy physicians flanked him. Grace walked beside him, wearing a clean Navy uniform that Brannigan's team had procured from a supply depot at 0500. It was the first time she had worn the uniform in 3 years. It fit like a second skin. It fit like coming home. Senator Alvarez called the hearing to order at exactly 9 a.m. He looked at the Admiral, then at Grace, then at the sealed files on the table in front of him. "Admiral Caldwell, Petty Officer Sullivan, this committee is prepared to receive your testimony regarding the events of the Korengal Valley operation and the subsequent actions taken to suppress evidence of criminal conduct by members of this body. Before you begin, I want you to know that the evidence provided by the DIA this morning has been reviewed by the committee and by the Attorney General's office. What you say today will be entered into the permanent record and will form the basis for criminal prosecution at the federal level." Caldwell nodded. He looked at Grace. She nodded back. "Senator, the Admiral said, his voice rough but unbroken. On the night of March 14th, 2022, 12 members of SEAL Team 7's classified unit, Wraith, were deployed to the Korangal Valley, Afghanistan, on a mission to intercept a weapons shipment. During the mission, the unit discovered evidence of an illegal arms deal worth $4.7 billion, facilitated by American defense contractors and authorized by 2 sitting members of the United States Senate. He paused. The room was silent. Within 48 hours of that discovery, Wraith was ambushed using classified intelligence that could only have been obtained from inside the chain of command. 11 operators were killed. 1 survived. The evidence was buried, and for 3 years the people responsible have used their positions of power to ensure that the truth never reached this room. He turned to Grace. Petty Officer Sullivan was the sole survivor of that ambush. She is the only living witness who can corroborate the events of that night. She has spent 3 years in hiding to protect her life. She is here today because she chose to stop hiding and start fighting. Grace stood. Her legs shook. Her hands trembled at her sides. 7 senators stared at her. A court reporter waited. The ghosts of 11 warriors pressed against her back, holding her up. She opened her mouth and told the truth. All of it. Every detail. Every name. Every moment from the FOB to the valley to the explosion to the hospital room where she had restarted a dead man's heart 3 times in one night. She talked for 47 minutes. She didn't stop. She didn't falter. She didn't look away. When she finished, Senator Alvarez removed his glasses and set them on the table. His hands were shaking. Petty Officer Sullivan, he said quietly, on behalf of this committee and the United States Senate, I want to express... He stopped. He pressed his lips together. He tried again. Your teammates, their names, would you read them into the record? Grace pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. She had written the names at 6 a.m., sitting beside the Admiral's bed, in handwriting that blurred through tears. Commander Daniel Reyes, Lieutenant Sarah Holt, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Garrett, Petty Officer First Class Victor Torres, Petty Officer Second Class Jason Silva. She read all 11 names, slowly, clearly. Each one a person, each one a life, each one someone who deserved to be remembered in a room where their killers had once sat in power. When she finished, the room was silent. Senator Alvarez wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. 2 other senators looked away. The court reporter had stopped typing. Grace folded the paper and placed it on the table. Then she sat down beside the Admiral's bed and took his hand. We did it, she whispered. No, Sullivan. His voice was barely a breath. You did it. 6 months later, Arlington National Cemetery. The morning was cold and bright and still. 12 headstones stood in a row, newly placed, newly engraved. 11 names that had been classified, buried, erased from the official record, now carved in white marble, permanent and undeniable. The 12th headstone was a memorial marker. It bore no name. It read simply, "For those who served in silence." Grace stood in front of Torres's headstone. She wore her dress uniform. Every medal she had earned was pinned to her chest, including the Medal of Valor that had been presented to her by the Secretary of the Navy 1 month ago in a ceremony she barely remembered because she had cried through the entire thing. Admiral Caldwell stood beside her, leaning on a cane. His recovery had been slow, painful, and stubborn, like the man himself. He had testified 3 more times after the initial hearing. His testimony, combined with Grace's and Webb's evidence, had resulted in the arrest and indictment of Senator Kessler, Senator Whitfield, and 14 defense contractors on charges ranging from treason to conspiracy to murder. Dr. Nathan Mercer had survived his cyanide attempt. He was currently in a federal detention facility awaiting trial. He had not spoken a single word since regaining consciousness. Director Patricia Winslow had pleaded guilty to conspiracy and obstruction. She was serving 12 years. Marcus Webb had entered witness protection after his testimony. Before he left, he had asked Brannigan to deliver a letter to his daughter. Grace didn't know what it said. She didn't need to. Families of the fallen stood in small clusters among the headstones. Parents who had been told their children died in a training accident. Spouses who had been given folded flags and redacted reports. Children who had grown up without answers. Today they had answers. Today they had names on stone. Grace placed her hand on Torres's headstone. The marble was cold under her palm. "You were right," she said quietly. "The heart wants to beat. You just have to remind it." She paused. "You reminded me, Torres, every single day, even when I was hiding, even when I was pretending to be nobody. You were in my hands every time I took a pulse, every time I checked an IV, every time I touched a patient and knew, really knew, what I was doing. That was you." She stepped back. The Admiral put his hand on her shoulder. She leaned into it just slightly and let the weight of the morning settle around her. A woman approached from the parking lot, young, mid-20s, dark hair. She walked hesitantly, like someone entering a room where she wasn't sure she belonged. Caldwell saw her first. His grip tightened on his cane. His breath caught. "Dad," the woman said. Grace stepped aside. The Admiral's daughter stood in front of him, eyes red, chin trembling, looking at him the way Grace had looked at his photograph for 3 years, like someone seeing a ghost become real. "I read the testimony," she said. "All of it. I read what you did, what you carried, why you couldn't tell me." Caldwell's composure, the iron composure that had held through 6 gunshot wounds, 3 cardiac arrests, and a Senate hearing, broke completely. Tears ran down his weathered face. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, for all of it, for every missed birthday, every unanswered phone call, every time you needed your father and I was somewhere I couldn't tell you about." She closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around him. He dropped the cane. It clattered on the stone path. He held his daughter with both arms, the same arms that had carried Grace out of a burning valley, and he wept. Grace watched them. She didn't look away. She let the moment exist, whole and unguarded and real, and she felt something shift inside her chest. Not grief, not rage, not the cold, hollow numbness that had been her companion for 3 years. Something warmer, something that had roots. She looked back at the 11 headstones, the names of her brothers and sisters, the people who had shaped her into who she was, and whose deaths had nearly destroyed who she could become. She was not invisible anymore. She was not a ghost. She was not the quiet nurse nobody noticed. She was Petty Officer First Class Grace Sullivan, the last medic of Wraith, the woman who saved an admiral, caught a traitor, brought down 2 senators, and stood in front of 7 lawmakers and spoke 11 names into the permanent record of the United States of America. And she had finally come home.